The morning sun streamed through the windows of Angela Davis's apartment as she packed her carry-on suitcase with careful precision. Today wasn't just another workday. After 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder at Meridian Airlines, Angela had finally reached a position that few black women in the industry had achieved before: regional director. She paused to look at the framed photo on her nightstand, her grandmother smiling proudly at her college graduation. "We did it, Grandma," she whispered, touching the frame gently. Her grandmother had been a cleaner for a small regional airline back in the 1970s, facing discrimination daily but never letting it dim her spirit. Now, Angela was about to inspect operations at Meridian's San Francisco hub as their new boss. The weight of this responsibility sat heavily on Angela's shoulders as she zipped her suitcase closed. She had worked twice as hard as many of her colleagues to get here, staying late, taking on extra projects, and never once complaining when she was overlooked for promotions that went to less qualified people. There had been tears in bathroom stalls and quiet moments of doubt in empty conference rooms, but today was proof that persistence paid off. Angela's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant Tina. "Car waiting downstairs. Safe travels. The team is eager to meet you." As she rode to the airport, Angela made a decision. Instead of using her executive travel code, which would alert staff to her status, she booked herself a regular first-class ticket through the airline's app. "I want to see how things really work," she told herself, "not how they work when everyone knows the boss is watching." The airport was busy that Tuesday morning. Angela moved through security with practiced ease, her simple black pantsuit and minimal jewelry not drawing any particular attention. That's how she preferred it. She'd learned long ago that in corporate America, sometimes being invisible had its advantages. You saw things others didn't want you to see. At the gate, Angela observed the Meridian staff. The gate agent was rushed and slightly short with an elderly couple who needed extra time to understand the boarding process. A flight attendant barely looked up from her phone as passengers asked questions. These small details mattered to Angela. Customer service wasn't just a department, it was the heartbeat of any airline. When boarding began, Angela waited her turn, listening to how first-class passengers were greeted compared to those in economy. The differences were subtle but real. The tone changed. Smiles became a bit more forced. These were the kinds of observations that wouldn't show up in any company report but told the true story of company culture. As Angela settled into seat 3A, she felt a flutter of excitement. This wasn't just a job for her, it was a chance to create real change. Her plans for Meridian included overhauling their customer service training, creating more opportunities for minority employees, and establishing the airline as an industry leader in both service and workplace culture. Opening her tablet, Angela began reviewing the quarterly reports for the San Francisco hub. The numbers were good, but numbers never told the whole story. She looked around the first-class cabin as it filled with other passengers, mostly men in business attire, a few women who looked like they traveled frequently, all of them moving with the confident air of people accustomed to privilege. A flight attendant, not the one who would later cause trouble, offered Angela a pre-flight drink. "First time flying with us?" she asked pleasantly. "No," Angela replied with a small smile. "I've been with Meridian for quite some time." The flight attendant nodded politely, not realizing the double meaning in Angela's words. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Angela gazed out the window at the ground crew working efficiently below. All these people, from the baggage handlers to the pilots, were now her responsibility. She felt both the weight and the honor of that fact. Little did Angela know that in just a few minutes, she would witness an incident that would test her leadership in ways she hadn't anticipated on this milestone day. Angela had just settled into her window seat, her tablet propped against the tray table as she reviewed next quarter's budget projections. The gentle hum of pre-flight chatter filled the first-class cabin. Businessmen comparing golf scores, a couple discussing their upcoming vacation, flight attendants greeting passengers with practiced smiles. Then, a sharp voice cut through the pleasant atmosphere. "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong section." Angela glanced up from her screen. 3 rows ahead, a flight attendant with perfectly styled blonde hair stood in the aisle, arms crossed over her chest. Her name tag read Karen W., and her smile was nowhere to be seen. Instead, her face wore an expression that Angela had witnessed many times before, that mixture of suspicion and disapproval that some people just couldn't hide when they saw someone who didn't fit their idea of who belonged. The target of Karen's attention was a woman about Angela's age, dressed in a smart navy business suit with natural hair, pulled back in a neat bun. She was already seated, seatbelt fastened, calmly looking up at the flight attendant. "I'm in the correct seat," the woman replied, her voice steady but with a hint of wariness that suggested this wasn't her first time dealing with such a situation. "Seat 2B, here's my boarding pass." She held up her phone, displaying her ticket. Karen barely glanced at the screen. "These things get mixed up sometimes. First class is fully booked today, and I don't recall seeing your name on my passenger list." The woman's shoulders tensed slightly. "My name is Dr. Leah Thompson. I booked this seat 3 weeks ago." A few nearby passengers began to take notice of the exchange. An older white man in a business suit glanced over, then quickly became very interested in his magazine. A middle-aged couple exchanged whispers. No one spoke up. "Let me just double-check something," Karen said, her tone making it clear she didn't believe Dr. Thompson. She leaned over to check the seat number, as if the woman might have mistakenly sat in 2B while actually holding a ticket for some distant economy seat. "The manifest shows this seat should be occupied by L. Thompson," Karen admitted reluctantly. "That's me," Dr. Thompson said. "Leah Thompson." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Do you have any other form of identification?" Angela felt her jaw tighten. The policy was to check ID at the gate, not after boarding. And Angela hadn't seen Karen ask for identification from any other first-class passenger. Dr. Thompson maintained her composure as she reached for her purse and produced her driver's license. Karen examined it for what seemed like an unnecessarily long time, her lips pursed. "There seems to be a system error," Karen finally said, her voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This seat was supposed to be reserved for one of our frequent flyers. I'll need to check with the gate." "I am a frequent flyer," Dr. Thompson countered, pulling up her Meridian Airlines app. "I have platinum status. I fly this route twice monthly for work." Karen's expression didn't change. "Well, there's clearly been some mistake. These seats are premium seats, you understand. They come at a considerable cost." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Around them, first-class passengers shifted uncomfortably in their leather seats, but no one intervened. "I understand exactly what these seats cost," Dr. Thompson replied, her voice tight but controlled. "That's why I paid for one." Karen's smile was thin and didn't reach her eyes. "Let me speak with my supervisor about this mix-up. In the meantime, we have seats available in economy that I can escort you to, so we don't delay our departure." Angela watched Dr. Thompson's face, the brief flash of anger quickly replaced by resignation. It was an expression Angela knew all too well, the calculation every black professional learned to make: fight and be labeled difficult or angry, or swallow the injustice and live to fight another day. "Fine," Dr. Thompson finally said, gathering her belongings. As Karen led Dr. Thompson past her seat toward economy, Angela made brief eye contact with the woman. In that moment, something passed between them, a shared understanding of what was really happening. Angela's hand tightened around her tablet as she made a mental note of Karen's full name on her badge. This wasn't just bad customer service. This was something Angela had seen too many times before. And now, as regional director, she was finally in a position to do something about it. Angela watched as Karen escorted Dr. Thompson toward economy class, her blood simmering with quiet anger. The first-class cabin had fallen back into its comfortable hum of conversation, passengers seemingly relieved that the uncomfortable situation had been resolved. None of them seemed troubled by what had just happened, or if they were, they weren't showing it. Angela pulled out her phone and opened her work email. With a few quick taps, she sent a message to her executive assistant. "Need employee file for Karen Westfield, flight attendant on flight 372 to San Francisco. Urgent." She added the flight number and Karen's employee ID number, which was visible on her name badge. The plane began its taxi to the runway as Angela tried to refocus on her work documents, but her mind kept drifting back to Dr. Thompson's face, that look of resigned dignity that hit too close to home. Angela had worn that same expression too many times in her career. The difference was, today she had the power to do something about it. 20 minutes after takeoff, Karen reappeared in the first-class cabin, now all smiles as she took drink orders. Angela observed her closely. The transformation was remarkable. Karen was warm and attentive with an elderly white couple in the front row, joking with a businessman about the weather in San Francisco, complimenting another woman on her handbag. When Karen reached Angela's row, her smile dimmed just slightly. "What can I get for you today?" she asked, her tone professional but noticeably cooler. "Sparkling water, no ice," Angela replied, meeting Karen's eyes directly. Karen nodded and moved on to the next passenger, a white man in a golf shirt who received Karen's full wattage smile and an offer of a warm towel that hadn't been extended to Angela. Angela's phone buzzed with a response from her assistant, employee file attached. Karen Westfield, 15 years with Meridian. Currently senior flight attendant for West Coast routes. Note, 2 customer complaints in last 18 months for unprofessional conduct, both filed by passengers of color. HR notes indicate counseling provided, no further action taken. Angela scrolled through the attached file, noting that Karen had received multiple commendations from white passengers over the years. The pattern was clear to anyone looking for it, but apparently no one had been looking. When Karen returned with the drinks cart, Angela accepted her sparkling water with a polite thank you and then asked, "Excuse me, could you tell me what happened with the passenger who was moved from first class?" Karen's smile tightened. "Oh, just a ticketing mix-up. Happens sometimes with the online booking system. Nothing to worry about." "I see," Angela said. "And has she been accommodated properly in economy?" Something flickered across Karen's face. Surprise, perhaps, that anyone was asking about Dr. Thompson. "Of course, we always take care of our passengers." As Karen moved on, Angela opened the airline's customer service app on her tablet and discreetly made her way to the seating chart. Dr. Thompson had been moved to a middle seat in economy, despite several aisle and window seats showing as available. This wasn't just poor customer service, it was deliberately punitive. Angela sent another message to her assistant. "Please flag Dr. Leah Thompson's customer profile as VIP'd for all future bookings. Arrange complimentary upgrade to first class for her return flight and send apology gift to her hotel in San Francisco. I'll handle personally upon landing." The businessman across the aisle had been watching Angela with mild curiosity. "First time flying Meridian?" he asked conversationally. Angela smiled. "No, I've been with the airline for 15 years. "Oh, you work for them?" he asked, sounding vaguely interested. "Yes," Angela replied simply, not elaborating further. She turned back to her tablet, reviewing the San Francisco staff list. She would be meeting with the entire team tomorrow morning, including Karen, who had no idea that her new boss was sitting just 3 rows behind her. For the remainder of the flight, Angela documented every interaction she observed. Noting how differently Karen treated passengers based on their appearance, the subtle shifts in her tone and body language, the extra attention lavished on some, while others received just the minimum required service. By the time the captain announced their initial descent into San Francisco, Angela had filled 3 pages of notes. And she was just getting started. The flight had reached its cruising altitude, and Angela was deep in thought. Part of her wanted to stand up right now, announce her position, and put Karen in her place. It would feel good, that moment of shocked recognition, the stammered apology, the embarrassment. But 15 years in corporate America had taught Angela that immediate satisfaction rarely led to lasting change. "Would you like a snack?" Karen's voice interrupted her thoughts. Angela looked up to see the flight attendant holding out a basket of packaged treats, her customer service smile firmly in place. But this smile was different from the ones Angela had seen her give to other passengers. It didn't reach her eyes, and there was something almost challenging in her gaze. "None, thank you," Angela replied, keeping her voice neutral. As Karen moved on, Angela noticed how she leaned in to chat warmly with an older white man in the next row, recommending the chocolate chip cookies with a playfulness that seemed genuine. The difference in treatment wasn't dramatic enough that most people would notice, but it was there, in the tone, the body language, the extra moment of attention. Angela's phone buzzed again. Her assistant had sent more information, Karen Westfield, senior flight attendant, applied for cabin service director position 3 times in the past 5 years. Rejected each time. Last rejection 6 months ago. That explained some of Karen's bitterness, Angela thought, but it didn't excuse her behavior. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and Angela gripped her armrest. Across the aisle, a young black man in a business suit pressed the call button. Karen appeared a moment later. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone professional but cool. "Could I get some water, please?" the man asked politely. "Service is suspended during turbulence," Karen replied shortly. "I'll come back when the captain turns off the seatbelt sign." Angela watched as Karen walked away, not stopping to say the same to the white passengers who might also want service. 5 minutes later, when a white woman pressed her call button, Karen brought her water immediately despite the seatbelt sign still being on. Angela made another note in her tablet. 2 hours into the flight, Angela decided to take a walk to stretch her legs. As she made her way toward the bathroom at the front of the cabin, she passed Dr. Thompson's now empty seat. A businessman had been upgraded from economy and was now enjoying the first-class service that Dr. Thompson had paid for but been denied. The injustice of it made Angela's chest tight. On her way back to her seat, she took a detour through economy class, scanning the rows until she spotted Dr. Thompson squeeze into a middle seat, trying to work on a laptop that barely fit on the tiny tray table. Their eyes met briefly, and Angela gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. She wanted to say something, to apologize for what had happened, to promise that it would be addressed. But this wasn't the time or place. Any conversation between them would draw attention, and Angela's instincts told her to wait. Back in her seat, Angela received another message from her assistant. Dr. Thompson is chief of neurology at San Francisco General, flying to present at a medical conference. Platinum member for 3 years, over 100,000 miles flown with Meridian annually. The irony wasn't lost on Angela. Dr. Thompson probably flew with Meridian more than most of the people currently sitting in first class. She might even be one of their most valuable customers in terms of miles flown and money spent. As the flight continued, Angela kept observing. She watched Karen chat happily with the white passengers while keeping interactions with passengers of color brief and strictly professional. She noticed how Karen double-checked the tickets of 2 Asian passengers who moved to empty seats in first class during the flight, but said nothing when a white passenger did the same thing. None of these actions were dramatic enough to cause a scene. They were small, everyday injustices, the kind that people of color experience constantly but could rarely prove, the kind that built up over time, wearing away at your sense of belonging and worth. But today, these small injustices weren't going unnoticed. Today, someone was watching. And tomorrow, things at Meridian Airlines were going to change. The flight was about 2 hours in when Angela noticed Karen making her way down the aisle again, this time with a tablet in hand. There was something different about her manner now, a touch of authority, perhaps even enjoyment, as she paused at each seat, checking something off on her tablet. Meal preferences, the businessman across from Angela explained, noticing her watching. They're pretty good about accommodating special requests in first class. Angela nodded, returning to her work documents. She had a full day of meetings tomorrow, and she needed to be prepared. The San Francisco hub had been performing well financially, but employee satisfaction scores had dropped over the past year. Now she was starting to understand why. "Excuse me," Karen's voice cut through Angela's thoughts. She looked up to see the flight attendant standing next to her seat, tablet in hand but not looking at it. Instead, Karen was staring directly at Angela with an expression that could only be described as suspicious. "Yes," Angela replied calmly. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Karen asked, her voice carrying just enough to make nearby passengers glance over. Angela felt a flash of heat rise to her face, but kept her expression neutral. "Of course," she said, pulling up the digital pass on her phone and holding it out. Karen made a show of examining it closely, much more closely than she had for any other passenger she'd interacted with. "This seat is supposed to be empty according to my manifest," she said, her tone suggesting Angela had somehow sneaked aboard. "Well, as you can see, I have a valid ticket for this seat," Angela replied evenly. Karen's eyes narrowed. "There seems to be some confusion. These premium seats are reserved well in advance. I don't recall seeing your name on our upgrade list." The similarity to what had happened with Dr. Thompson was striking. Angela noticed a few nearby passengers watching now, some with uncomfortable expressions, others with the blank look of people trying to pretend they weren't listening. "I didn't use an upgrade," Angela said. "I purchased this ticket directly." Karen's smile was tight. "Nevertheless, there seems to be a discrepancy with our system. Do you mind showing me some identification?" Angela met her gaze steadily. "Actually, I do mind. My boarding pass has been verified twice already, once at security and once at the gate. There's no airline policy that requires passengers to show ID after boarding." A flicker of annoyance crossed Karen's face. She wasn't used to being challenged. "It's simply a security measure, ma'am, to ensure that everyone is in their proper place." The emphasis on proper place wasn't lost on Angela. She kept her voice level but firm. "My proper place is exactly where I'm sitting, where my paid ticket indicates I should be." Karen's professional veneer slipped just slightly. "Look, we sometimes have issues with our system, and I'm just trying to sort this out. If there's been a mix-up—" "There hasn't been a mix-up," Angela interrupted, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd extend me the same courtesy you've shown to other passengers in this cabin." A few heads turned their way now, no longer pretending not to listen. Karen's face flushed slightly. "I treat all our passengers with the utmost respect," she said, her voice tight. "Do you?" Angela asked quietly. "I've been observing quite a different standard of service on this flight." Karen's expression shifted from annoyance to alarm. Passengers didn't usually talk back like this, and they certainly didn't claim to have been observing service standards. "I'll need to speak with the lead flight attendant about this," Karen said, her customer service smile completely gone now. "I think that's an excellent idea," Angela replied. "Please do that." As Karen turned and walked briskly toward the front of the cabin, Angela caught the eye of the businessman across the aisle, who gave her a small nod of approval. An older woman 2 rows up had turned around and was watching with interest. Angela took a deep breath. She hadn't planned on revealing her position this way, but Karen had forced her hand. Sometimes the best teaching moments weren't planned. They just happened. And this was about to become a significant teaching moment for everyone on board, especially for Karen Westfield. The lead flight attendant was making his way down the aisle now, followed by Karen, whose expression wavered between vindication and uncertainty. Angela straightened in her seat, ready for what would come next. Karen marched down the aisle with the lead flight attendant in tow, a tall man with salt and pepper hair named Tony who had been with the airline for over 20 years. The look on Karen's face was a mixture of irritation and triumph, the kind of expression that said she was about to put a difficult passenger in their place. "This is the passenger I mentioned," Karen said as they reached Angela's row, her voice just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. There seems to be some confusion about her seating assignment. Tony looked at Angela with a practiced, neutral expression. "Ma'am, I understand there might be an issue with your seat. I'd be happy to help sort this out." Angela smiled politely. "There's no issue with my seat. I have a valid ticket for 3A, which is where I'm sitting. Your colleague seems to think otherwise, though she hasn't explained why." Karen jumped in. "The manifest shows this seat should be empty. I'm simply following protocol by verifying." "Could I see your boarding pass, please?" Tony interrupted, his tone professional. Angela handed over her phone with the boarding pass displayed. Tony looked at it for just a moment, and then something changed in his expression. His eyes widened slightly as he looked from the phone to Angela's face and back again. "Ms. Davis," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Karen looked confused. "You know this passenger?" Tony straightened up immediately, his entire demeanor shifting. "Karen, this is Angela Davis." The name clearly meant nothing to Karen. "And?" she prompted, growing impatient. "Angela Davis, our new regional director," Tony clarified, his voice tight. The first-class cabin went dead silent. The businessman across the aisle nearly choked on his drink. An older couple a few rows up turned around to stare openly. The transformation on Karen's face was instantaneous: shock, disbelief, and then dawning horror as the realization hit her. I don't understand," Karen stammered, her face draining of color. There was nothing on the passenger list about. "I booked my ticket as a regular passenger," Angela explained, her voice calm but carrying clearly in the silent cabin. "I wanted to experience our service exactly as our customers do." Tony was now standing ramrod straight, looking like he might salute at any moment. "Ms. Davis, please accept our apologies for any inconvenience. If there's anything at all we can do to make your flight more comfortable." "Actually, there is," Angela said, standing up slowly. She was shorter than both flight attendants, but somehow seemed to tower over them. "I'd like to speak with both of you privately for a moment." She gestured toward the galley area at the front of the cabin. Tony nodded quickly and led the way, with Karen following behind, moving as if in a daze. Once they were partially concealed from the curious eyes of the passengers, Angela turned to face them both. Her voice was low but intense. "Tony, could you please go to economy class and find Dr. Leah Thompson? She was incorrectly removed from her first-class seat earlier. I'd like her brought back to where she belongs, with a full apology from the airline." Tony nodded vigorously. "Of course, Ms. Davis, right away." As he hurried off, Angela turned to Karen, whose face had now gone from white to red with embarrassment. "Ms. Davis, I want to explain," Karen began, her voice shaking slightly. "Not now," Angela said quietly. "Right now, I want you to focus on providing excellent service to all our passengers for the remainder of this flight. We'll discuss your actions in detail tomorrow morning at the staff meeting. I expect to see you there at 9 a.m. sharp." Karen swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Back in the first-class cabin, whispers were racing from seat to seat as passengers tried to figure out what was happening. Angela returned to her seat with perfect composure, aware of the curious glances but choosing to ignore them. A few minutes later, Tony reappeared, escorting Dr. Thompson back to first class. The expression on Dr. Thompson's face was one of confusion until she spotted Angela. Their eyes met, and a moment of understanding passed between them. "Dr. Thompson, please accept our sincere apologies for the mix-up," Tony said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Your first-class seat is ready for you, and of course, your fare will be fully refunded as a gesture of goodwill from Meridian Airlines." As Dr. Thompson settled back into her rightful seat, Angela caught her eye and gave her a small, knowing smile. This wasn't just about one seat on one flight. This was about dignity, respect, and finally having the power to make things right. The next morning, the conference room at Meridian Airlines San Francisco hub buzzed with nervous energy. Word had spread quickly about what happened on yesterday's flight. Staff members exchanged whispers as they found their seats, glancing frequently at the door. At exactly 9 a.m., Angela walked in, dressed in a crisp navy suit, her expression calm but determined. The room fell silent immediately. Behind her came Tony, the lead flight attendant from the flight, carrying a stack of folders. Karen sat in the back row, eyes downcast, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. She had arrived 30 minutes early, sitting alone while others clustered in groups, their curious glances making it clear she was the subject of their whispered conversations. "Good morning, everyone," Angela began, her voice warm but authoritative. "For those who haven't met me yet, I'm Angela Davis, your new regional director. I planned a different type of introduction, but sometimes life gives us unexpected teaching moments." She placed her tablet on the podium and looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "Yesterday, I witnessed something on our flight from Chicago that troubled me deeply. A first-class passenger was removed from her rightful seat based on nothing more than assumptions about where she belonged. I know this because the same thing almost happened to me." Murmurs rippled through the room. Several people turned to look at Karen, whose face had flushed crimson. "I could focus today on that single incident, but that would miss the larger point," Angela continued. "One person's behavior reflects a culture that either allows or discourages such actions, and culture starts at the top." She walked around to the front of the podium, removing the barrier between herself and the staff. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here because I believe Meridian can be better. I believe we can build an airline where every passenger is treated with equal respect and dignity, regardless of what they look like or where they come from." The tension in the room eased slightly. A few people nodded in agreement. "Starting today, we're implementing mandatory diversity training for all customer-facing staff." This isn't a punishment, it's an opportunity to grow. To learn how unconscious biases affect our interactions, even when we don't realize it. Tony began distributing the folders, which contained information about the new training program. Additionally, we'll be revising our customer complaint system. In reviewing our records, I found that complaints from passengers of color were routinely classified as resolved after a simple apology email, while complaints from other passengers received more thorough follow-up. That changes today. Angela paused, looking directly at Karen for the first time since entering the room. "Ms. Westfield, would you join me up here, please?" The room went silent again as Karen slowly stood and made her way to the front, her steps hesitant. Many expected a public firing. Some might have even enjoyed seeing it. But Angela had different plans. "Karen will be temporarily reassigned to our customer insight team," Angela announced. "She'll be working directly with our most frequent travelers, listening to their experiences, learning from their feedback, and helping us understand how we can serve them better." Karen looked up in surprise, having clearly expected worse. "This isn't about punishment," Angela said quietly, speaking now to Karen directly though everyone could hear. "It's about growth. I believe people can change when given the right opportunity and motivation." She turned back to address the whole room. "Dr. Thompson, the passenger who was removed from first class yesterday, has agreed to come speak to our staff next month about her experiences as a frequent flyer who happens to be a black woman. I expect everyone to attend." A hand raised in the middle of the room. "What about the customers who, support this kind of behavior?" "We have some passengers who seem to expect certain people to be treated differently." Angela nodded, appreciating the honest question. "We can't control our passengers' biases, but we can set the standard for how people are treated on our aircraft. Anyone who flies with Meridian needs to understand that respect is non-negotiable." As the meeting continued, a sense of possibility filled the room. For some, it was the first time they'd heard a leader speak so directly about these issues. For others, it was validation of concerns they'd kept silent for years. 6 months later, Meridian's customer satisfaction scores had risen 15%. Employee retention improved dramatically. The diversity training program Angela implemented became a model that other airlines began to adopt. And Dr. Thompson, she not only continued to fly with Meridian, but joined their customer advisory board, helping shape policies that ensured everyone could travel with dignity, regardless of who they were or where they sat. As for Karen, the story didn't end with shame or dismissal. It ended with something far more powerful, the chance to learn, to grow, and ultimately to change.